Hello and welcome to In Conversation. And I'm delighted to say that our distinguished guest tonight is a troublemaker. And he's making trouble at the moment for those who promised us an easy Brexit. It'd all be wonderful and we'd all find out what it entails eventually, apparently. He is a Brexit bluster buster. And he's been taking on some of the people who say they know what they're doing, but has been trying to expose what they're doing. So the question we're going to discuss tonight effectively is, can Brexit be stopped? And if so, how? And just a quick word of background, Lord Adonis, Andrew Adonis, is known to many of us as a journalist and author. He was on the FT for a while. He was also a government minister, and he served in the job that a former Chancellor, Alistair Darling, told me was the worst job in government as a transport secretary, because everybody blames you if the trains don't run on time. So we're glad to see you here tonight. Andrew, let's begin with the obvious question. Can Brexit be stopped? How could it be stopped?
Well, can I first of all apologise for keeping you waiting? You're not going to believe this. I got on the wrong train at St Pancras. I know, I'm mimicking the Prime Minister, who clearly has been on the wrong train now for 2 years. And the one that I got on was, in fact, it was going to Dover rather than to Canterbury, and I only realised when I got to Ebbsfleet I was on the wrong train. And then I got off at Ebbsfleet thinking this was the sensible thing to do, but in fact the Canterbury trains don't stop at Ebbsfleet. So I then had to go back to Stratford. So actually the full horror that the Prime Minister has gone through today with her various press conferences and people contradicting her, I feel as if I've gone through it in the last hour and a half. I can tell you it will not end for her as well as it's ended for me, which is arriving in your wonderful university in Canterbury. And I have hugely fond memories of Canterbury, two particular memories. I did the Today programme in this hall about 6 months ago when they did it from here, when I made a great pitch for the People's Vote, which was then regarded as quite a quaint idea. I mean, there were sort of about 3 of us who were in favour, and it's now gathered a huge head of steam. But it was a great audience from Canterbury, and a large number of students turned up, even though we started at 6 o'clock in the morning. I think it must be the only time that they ever saw
they were coming home.
The facilities of the university at that hour of the morning, but it was great. And the other memory I have was Gavin, your predecessor, Bob Worcester, as Chancellor, who invited me to give what the Chancellor's lecture, it was called. You now do the Chancellor's In Conversations. You've got a lot more informal. Then it was a formal lecture, which I gave 9 years ago, in 2009, on the subject of high-speed rail and the transport revolution that we needed. And 9 years on, high-speed rail is being built. So if we can build a high-speed rail line, start all that in 9 years, I think with a bit of luck we can bring a halt to Brexit in 9 weeks, which is roughly what we've got to do. Now, how do we do it? Well, Michael Heseltine said to me at the beginning how it would be done. He said to me, it's an impossible proposition. The thing about Brexit is there was no actual Brexit proposition on the ballot 2 years ago. There was a wish list, and it might be nice to leave the European Union and all that. But we've been in this union for 45 years, our entire trade, economy, huge amounts of foreign policy, social policy, all that are deeply intertwined. So it was always going to be an absolute nightmare to come out, like, suddenly all the wiring goes in the house and you've got to completely redo it, and you can't do it all in one go and all that. He said the thing to do is to stand back, do nothing for 2 years, and just wait for it all to implode. And he said, I know Boris, he said, because Boris was his successor as MP for Henley. He said that he's certainly not on top of any of the detail. I know Boris well too, because when he was Mayor of London, I was Transport Minister. He was never on top of any of the detail then too. Remember, it took Boris 6 months to realise there was this thing called the Northern Ireland backstop. He only woke up to it 2 weeks ago when he was writing his Daily Telegraph column. It's only when he was on deadline he ever notices anything at all. And in fact, he was part of the government that actually agreed it. So he said it will simply implode over time, which is roughly what's been happening, actually. Two things have been going on in the last 2 years. The impossibility of a proposition that we were going to leave the customs union, the single market, all of the institutions of Europe, the impossibility of that has been catching up with Theresa May. On the one hand, that's the first thing that's been going. And secondly, what often happens in this country, it can be slow to happen, but it does happen on big issues, which is that the public has been gathering pace. that this all happened in a rush 2 years ago. There wasn't that much time to consider the options. Remember, David Cameron came back, he held the referendum immediately. A whole lot of propositions that were made that it was hard to test because nobody could see. I mean, 350 million a week for the NHS, maybe, maybe not, who knows? Were 7 million Turks about to come? You know, all these claims that were made, and they weren't properly refuted. Well, now, over the course of the last, 2.5 years, they've been tested, it's become clear what's happening, people are starting to follow. Young people in particular and students are becoming quite rightly deeply alarmed at what this may mean for their careers, their lives, and all of that. As you know, I do lots of student meetings at the moment, and somebody got up, the last one I did, and said, do you know, I've worked out what this Brexit thing is. We're going to be shut up on a small island with Jacob Rees-Mogg, Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, and Nigel Farage, and that's not what I want. Now that is, I don't want it either.
Well, actually, I'll ask the audience how many want it.
So we'll ask in a moment.
Not many.
So they're all waking up too, and these two are coming together. The combination of the implosion of the Brexit policy, which we saw a very significant advance for today. I mean, basically what's happened today, I don't know if you've been following the news, the President of the European Council has rejected Theresa May's white paper proposal, the Chequers proposal. It is completely unworkable.
But just to interrupt on that point, they have been absolutely consistent, haven't they? They've said you can't pick bits out of the single market that you like and not other bits. So they haven't changed anything, and they're not going to change it. That's my point.
No, that's completely right. And they've also said that the backstop in respect of Northern Ireland, they are going to honour, that they're not going to negotiate it. Now, what they'd expected Theresa May would do was that she would come and show flexibility. She would say that this is a negotiation. I've put these proposals on the table. We now need to negotiate them, because what they've always thought along is the only workable thing would be some status rather like Norway or Switzerland, where we're not actually in the European Union, but we are in essentially much of the customs and single market arrangements, and having done that deal, we don't then seek to change it every year. What became clear from the Prime Minister's 10 minutes, and by the way, what a humiliation for Britain. Humiliation. We're one of the largest countries in the EU, at the heart of it. We're now reduced to supplicating for 10 minutes at the dinner. I mean, this is where we've come down to as a result of the last 2 years. But in that 10 minutes, she made it very clear that she wasn't prepared to negotiate. Well, if one side isn't prepared to negotiate, how can they expect the other side to? And that's what's now happening.
But in terms of let's do the Chequers agreement first, which is, let's see who agreed with whom on that. Because the way it's been sort of presented is there's a Chequers deal. Well, the deal seems to be an internal Conservative Party matter, which only applies to some people within the Conservative Party. I mean, is that your reading of it?
Well, the Chequers proposition was never tenable anyway. It was only ever workable as a first stage of a negotiation, because there were three huge problems with the Chequers deal. The first was it was offering a customs union in respect of goods, but most of our trade with Europe is services, because we've become a substantially service-based economy over the last 30 years. And the reason for the goods is what the Prime Minister's been anxious to avoid all along, because she knows it would sink the whole of Brexit without trace at the 29th of March next year. And her only concern is to get over the line. This has been the whole thing all along, is if you had suddenly customs posts and customs controls and 60-mile tailbacks of trucks in Dover, and of course this big problem of the Irish border, because if you have a customs border, then you have to have customs checks. So it was only a proposition in respect of goods, first. Secondly, even on goods, the proposal was that we'd be able to pick and mix, that Parliament would be able to take a decision on each set of regulations to do with the customs union in due course, which was to appease Jacob Rees-Mogg and the right wing of the Conservative Party. The problem with that is you cannot go into a customs union and redefine it every year. The whole point about a customs union is that you do agree to stay in. And of course, the reason why, I mean, this whole thing is Alice in Wonderland. The reason why we're in the European Union and have a seat around the table is so that we play a key part in devising the rules. Having helped to devise the rules, then of course we obey the rules. Whereas the position which we've got into now in the European Union, and the Chequers proposal, was that in order to prevent an immediate imposition of customs controls and checks on trucks, we were in the immediate future going to accept the rules, but because we're thereafter going to play no part whatever in setting the rules, what we were going to do instead was to decide whether or not we were going to agree with them. So we could progressively disengage from the customs union. Now that's an intellectually completely unworkable proposition. So that could only be the basis for a negotiation. But the third problem, which is the thing that was also critical to making it unviable, is this issue of Ireland. Now, I cannot overemphasise how important the Irish dimension is to this. We are a United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. We are responsible for Northern Ireland. The peace process in Northern Ireland, 3,500 killed, tens of thousands maimed and injured, came to a conclusion with the Good Friday Agreement of 20 years ago, one of the key requirements of which is that there shall be no hard border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, where there are hundreds of thousands of crossings each day, including a motorway, the A1, which now goes from Dublin to Belfast, a railway. I mean, I love the railways. I've been on all the trains. I did it recently. I complained the train isn't really fast enough. I've got all kinds of proposals for reforming the trains, but they do depend upon not having a border where the trains have to stop and be searched. And this big problem of what happens with smuggling if you have differential tariff rates. Now, that is there, has to be dealt with. What is the view of this thing called the ERG, the European Research Group, which is very misnamed because it does no research, certainly not on Europe. I mean, it's not. I wanted to rename it the Economic Ruin Group because that's roughly what it stands for. Well, their view, what is their view on the border? Well, Boris Johnson last week, it's a suicide vest, the Northern Ireland issue. I've never heard a more irresponsible statement by any senior minister, let alone a former foreign secretary, saying that our arrangements in respect of Northern Ireland are a suicide vest. However, my great friend Jacob and I, we spend lots of time in studios together. I spend much longer with Jacob than with most members of my family at the moment. And Jacob says, wait for it, you have to understand the significance of the words, because we're in a very significant crisis as a country at the moment. We joke about it, but it is a significant crisis. Jacob says that the way that we deal with the border in Northern Ireland is that Ireland should leave the European Union as well. If Ireland leaves the European Union and then agrees to adopt our tariff policies afterwards, then you don't have, hey presto, any need for a border. And he says, if there is any need for checks, it gets worse, any need for checks, then we can have mobile, we don't have to have fixed, we can have mobile patrols, which will stop cars and trucks, like we did during the Troubles. So the answer is either a suicide vest which you blow up, or neo-colonialism. Well, that didn't have a very happy ending in Ireland. Or if none of those work, we go back to the 1980s and we have mobile patrols. Now, if this wasn't at one level quite comic, because these are all such... there's Nigel. Sorry, don't get me on Nigel. Nigel says that Ireland is all got up by Barnier. He said to me when I was last, all got up by Barnier. I said to him, well, Nigel, I was actually in Belfast 2 weeks ago. Nobody mentioned Barnier. They all mentioned the fact of this border and what was going to happen. And I don't think it's because of Michel Barnier that they suddenly discovered that there's a border between Northern Ireland.
I can tell you, having lived in Belfast for quite a long time, there were grievances before Michel Barnier. There were.
And that's all coming back now to roost. All these hens are coming back.
And Boris Johnson also said the Northern Ireland border was like the border between Westminster and Islington, which I also know quite well, and it's quite different. But
I live on that border. Now, it is true that the rubbish is collected more efficiently on the Westminster side than on the Camden side, but I haven't noticed people actually carrying their rubbish over to the other side of the border in order to see this collectible.
Look, you've diagnosed the problem, but are you saying that what we have to do to stop Brexit is just sit and wait because the people who most want it can't do it, which is clearly part of your argument, when the counter-argument goes as follows: they are the government, they don't have to give people a people's vote, they will drive it through, and maybe it will be the Gove plan, which appears to be we get anything across the line and then we continue to negotiate. So perhaps for all eternity we'll have Brexit discussions. But I mean, that seems to be what he was suggesting.
That's certainly what Theresa May's plan is just to do whatever she can do to get over the line on the 29th of March. She has this big problem. It's called Parliament. Parliament, it's been in recess for it's spent most of the summer on holiday, so it hasn't been doing a great job representing you over the course of the last 2 months. It's now on recess for another 3 weeks. I've just, I don't know if any of you follow me on Twitter, but I've been saying a few things about what's being on this afternoon, including that Parliament should be recalled. After all, what happened this afternoon, it's very important when we joke to understand the seriousness. What happened this afternoon is that Britain's entire foreign policy collapsed at about 4 o'clock this afternoon when Donald Tusk gave his press conference. We have no foreign policy. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, we have no foreign policy at the moment. At the moment, in 6 months' time, we withdraw ourselves from the European Union, which is the basis of our economic policy, a large part of our defence and security policy, and our international policy. We have no other plan. Don't think that they're all very clever out there and they've got a great plan. There is no plan. That's what happens. So it's not too much to expect that Parliament might meet. It probably isn't, because she doesn't quite like meeting Parliament at the moment. However, what she cannot avoid is that when she comes back with either her treaty, her agreement, or no agreement, because Parliament has already enacted a statute that says in the event of no agreement, she has to present a statement to Parliament, which will then form the basis for a debate and a vote. Parliament will have its say. Now, at the moment, I mean, you can never predict the future, but as of now, I cannot see how she can get through those parliamentary votes, because she starts off without a majority, even with the DUP, which, you know, these are the most expensive votes ever bought in Parliament, £1 billion for the DUP to get those 10 votes. But even with the DUP, she doesn't have a majority if she has any group of either the Conservatives who are pro-European or the ERG, and both of those at the moment aren't supporting her, voting against. So either her no deal or her deal will be voted down.
Can I just...
And then there's a crisis, and then what happens after the crisis is what merits further discussion.
Possibly a people's vote, and we'll get onto that. But just on the parliamentary arithmetic, I know it sounds like a bit like inside baseball, but you could actually see, for example, the Scottish National Party playing no part in this, either abstaining or certainly not pushing too hard, because it may be in their best interests to end the union, see this as a stepping stone to ending the union. You could see that the secret weapon of the Conservative Party has always been loyalty, although it's not entirely been evident most recently. But you could see that the core of Conservatives, perhaps with a hand on heart or a heavy heart, might just go along with it and go along with the Gove plan. And there'll be some people in Labour who will, goodness knows what Labour is going to do. That may be another, perhaps we'll have another hour on that at some point. But I mean, they're not exactly the most effective opposition on this, let's put it like that.
Well, shall I take those one by one? The SNP would be dead in Scotland if they didn't vote against Theresa May's plan or no plan. They'd be absolutely dead in Scotland, because the idea that they would connive in a Tory hard Brexit or no Brexit plan that would be a dagger at the heart of the Scottish economy is just, I mean, they wouldn't be able to survive that. My party, the Labour Party, we'd make mincemeat of them in Scotland if they did it. They also have a big problem of the argument, even if they tried to do it, because, of course, their argument is that they want to be independent in Europe. Mm-hmm. This is a crucial part of that. Indeed, it's the only thing that gives Scottish nationalism credibility, but it gives it a lot of credibility if England leaves the EU, is that they could be in Europe. And obviously they can't run that argument if they're actually voting against the motions that might make it possible to stay in Europe. So that isn't going to happen. On the Conservative side, look, you're absolutely right. Once the thumb screws, the rack and all of that come out, then the pressure for loyalty is great. However, the problem is that she is between a rock and a hard place. She has Jacob and a group on the Tory uncompromising right, who this Europe thing has become a kind of religion, this anti-Europeanism. It's a total religion. I mean, I did Any Questions last week in Worthing with Bernard Jenkin. Bernard is just not rational on the subject of Europe. I mean, Europe is a kind of a foreign invasion that's waiting to happen, which is undermining all our liberty. He's been saying all this for 20, 25 years. You know, once you start doing all this, it does become part of you. So I think there's, at the very least, there's going to be 20 or 30 on the Conservative right who will vote against any deal on the grounds that it's subjugation by Brussels. And then on the moderate side, Dominic Grieve, Anna Soubry, Nicky Morgan, you know, there's now quite a substantial group, yes, of those.
But you see them as quite brave, though. I mean, they're outliers, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. And they're the sorts of people who understand that the vital interests of the country and their constituents at stake, and I don't think they're going to vote for it either. So as of now, all this can change. As of now, I don't see a majority. And my party, the Labour Party, and by the way, I'm delighted that Canterbury has a Labour MP, and Rosie, I think, is here, because of the bright lights, I can't see the audience. Is Rosie here? Yeah. Sure. Where is she? Congratulations. I mean, there was nothing that gave us more Joy, frankly, at the last election than your election here in Canterbury, and you're doing a fantastic job. So, but Labour, there's an easy bit and a difficult bit for Labour. The easy bit is I cannot see Jeremy voting with Theresa May for her deal. That is not going to happen. I mean, you've got to understand, Jeremy, the idea that Jeremy could be a party to a far-right Brexit, where he'd have to defend for the next, the rest of his life, having got Theresa May off the hook and allowed her hard Brexit to go through. That's not going to happen. The big issue, which is being debated, I'll be quite frank, ferociously inside the Labour Party at the moment, and will be a big issue in our conference, is what happens if and when her treaty is defeated. Obviously, we want a general election because we would like to see this present government replaced. But if there isn't a majority for a general election, which there probably won't be because Conservatives aren't keen to face the electorate at the moment, then will Labour, as a united party, vote for the people's vote? That's what I want to see, and that's what I very much hope will happen. The more pressure we get from that, those of you who are Labour Party members, the better. I believe we can bring that about. But it's a continuing debate, and it will be very much to the fore in Liverpool.
Can I put to you the devil's advocate position on the people's vote? And the one which is most difficult for me to say, because it's about a vote, is it's undemocratic to have a vote. But would you like to feel that particular one? But it is said repeatedly, as you know. Yeah. It's somehow undemocratic, because we've had a vote.
Yeah, this is nonsense. The idea that the people can betray the people is a category error.
So they're to blame, everybody here.
Do you all feel you're going to be betrayed? Can I ask, this is a good cross-section of Canterbury here, how many of you think that a people's vote is the right thing to do in the position we're in as a country at the moment? Okay, Gavin, you're my witness on this. That looks to me about 4/5. How many are against? Well, it's an overwhelming majority. And now, I'm not saying it's an ideal situation we're in. I wouldn't have held this referendum 2 years ago. But we can't rewrite the past. I'm not David Cameron. I'm not the guy who largely threw the country away. I mean, he did that. We've got to make the best of the situation that we now face. But there's another compelling argument. Not just that the people can't betray the people, but 2 years ago, of course, there was no leave option on the table. This was the chronic problem. This so-called instruction from the British people we had 2 years ago, what was it an instruction for? We had Daniel Hannan telling us we were staying in the single market and the customs union, and there was no question that that wouldn't happen. We had Boris saying the same. We had the Conservative Party manifesto from the election before, 2015, which said we'd be staying in the single market. We had Boris telling us there'll be 350 million for the NHS every week, and we've now got the 50 billion exit deal. We were told that there'll be 7 million Turks seeking to join the European Union the day after the referendum. Now we've actually got, or will get, the Prime Minister's deal or no deal. This whole thing is coming to an actual proposition on the table. Now, I'm spending a lot of time in Ireland, Northern Ireland at the moment. When there was the referendum on the Good Friday Agreement in 1998, the government sent every elector in Northern Ireland a copy of the Good Friday Agreement. It sent them a copy of it. What I think should happen is that every elector in the United Kingdom, after the Prime Minister has negotiated her agreement, whatever it is, should be sent a copy. I mean, we can all read, can't we? I mean, this is the biggest thing that's facing us as a country. We should all be sent a copy, and we should have an independent statement about evaluation of what the costs are going to be and all that, and the same on the side of those of us who want to remain. And that alone makes the argument for the people's vote, because you couldn't be sent a copy 2 years ago because there was nothing to be sent a copy of. So it is the fulfilment of the democracy, not the undermining of democracy, that we have a people's vote. And the answer to those who say that it's undemocratic is that the people cannot betray the people.
Now, but there is one practical problem, which is there isn't time, because Theresa May did what businesses tend not to do, which is say, I'm going to do a very big thing on a certain date, and I'll tell you later what the big thing is. They tend to think of what the big thing is first before setting the date, but the date is fixed at March 29th. So the argument is, there is not time to have a people's vote, to have a referendum, to send everybody out knowledge of what we're actually voting on this time. It's not possible.
Well, it is true. I mean, the government has spent 2 years doing almost nothing. So, I mean, they have wasted a huge amount of time, and that's a big problem, and it's the reason why we're in the crisis that we are today. But it's very important to understand what the law says, because the European Union, like our country, is governed by law. What Article 50, this is the article of the Treaty of Lisbon, which is what we're doing all this by, says, is that the 2-year period, which expires on the 29th of March next year, can be extended by a unanimous vote of the European Council. That's what the law says. So the question is, if we need more time to hold a referendum, which we may do, because if we only get the votes in Parliament in December or January, then you've got to legislate for the referendum, you've got to hold it. Probably we would seek to hold a referendum next June, which will be the 3rd anniversary of the last referendum, which, by the way, will be 1 year longer than the interval between the last 2 general elections. So if we could hold 2 general elections within the space of 2 years, we can certainly hold 2 referendums on the biggest single issue facing the country. But the key point on this is that if the European Council votes to extend it, that period can be extended. Now, those who know about the operation of the European Council, Lord Kerr, who you may have seen on Newsnight 2 nights ago, who negotiated Article 50 and drafted it, and the conversations I've had with senior ministers on the continent are as follows. That if we seek to extend the Article 50 period for the purposes of holding a people's vote, that would certainly be granted, because the convention of the European Union is that when member states need, because this is a club of democracies, you wouldn't believe it from some of the things that Nigel Farage and others says, but all of the states of the European Union are democracies, apart possibly from Hungary at the moment, which is slightly going off the deep end. And by the way, it was Theresa May's party last week which voted not to censure Hungary, the only mainstream party of left and right that didn't do so. And why? You need to understand the Alice in Wonderland world we're in. The reason why she wouldn't vote to censure them last week is she thinks she might need Viktor Orban's vote for the endgame of Brexit. I mean, talk about the debasing of our foreign policy at the moment. But almost all of the other states of the European Union are bona fide democracies. Often they need longer themselves to ratify treaties, make agreements, and so on. And the convention of the European Union is that if member states need longer for their bona fide democratic processes, this is always granted. So the view is that if we ask for an extension of the Article 50 period to hold the referendum, that will be granted, and we can hold our referendum in good order. If we ask for an extension because we're going to have more adventures in Wonderland, then that's unlikely to be granted, and I think that that's perfectly fair and reasonable.
So you think a people's vote is doable?
Yes.
Do you think it's likely?
I think it's increasingly likely, because there is no alternative which looks credible at the moment.
Does it get the politicians off the hook?
Because it's you that decide then, so they haven't got to take ultimate responsibility. But it's credible in 2 senses. The first is that it doesn't look as if there's going to be a withdrawal agreement that can get majority support in Parliament, so there has to be some way out of it. And the second reason why it's credible is if the intention is basically to put a stop to this nonsense, which is basically where I think we're going to get to, then given that this process started with a referendum, probably the best democratic way to end it is by a referendum. I say probably because constitutionally we're a parliamentary democracy. Parliament definitely unambiguously has the right to put a halt to the whole Brexit thing. But given that the people were consulted and there was a referendum at the beginning of the process, probably the right way to end it is a referendum, and that's the conclusion, very reluctantly, that I and many others have come to.
The one other argument that I've heard repeatedly, which, given that we've all come together as a nation in the past 2 years, is a bit of an odd one, but it would be divisive. It would somehow be divisive if we did have a vote.
Well, it is true that I and many others are going to have to spend even more hours with Jacob Rees-Mogg and Nigel Farage and Boris in
You're
studios.
doing it for the country, though.
That is going to be extremely divisive. But the idea that we give them a veto, because you think about what this divisive issue means. If we're not going to do something because it means a big argument, and we're a democracy, you have arguments in democracy, then what we're saying is that those people who basically want to traduce the country have a veto. Are you prepared to give them a veto? Well, I'm not. So, and though I do accept, because I've been travelling across the country, and there's some parts of the country where Leave had a majority, and there are strongly held opinions there. My argument there is that the only thing that's worse than holding a referendum is not holding a referendum if the whole future of the country is in the balance. Because in all parts of the country, including the parts that voted Leave, if, as I earnestly believe, Brexit is going to be a disaster, it's going to be disastrous for British jobs, it'll be disastrous for the livelihoods of British people, and it could be really seriously undermining of our international position and possibly even our security. If all those things are true, then we have a duty to do what we can to give the people the option to stop it. And they will not thank us if in 2, 3, 4 years' time, and it goes badly wrong, we say, well, the reason we didn't hold a people's vote is that Nigel Farage told us it was going to be divisive. I'm afraid that won't wash. The big problem that we've had all the way through this process is that we've had leaders who will not lead. This has been the fundamental problem all the way through. And I just don't think that in this extreme crisis that we're in at the moment, we can carry on with that. We've got to lead.
I want to throw it open to questions as much as possible in a moment, but let me just pursue an argument about Labour, which is, as you say, there's lots of arguments going on within Labour, and we'll hear some of them at the party conference. If you were in the Labour leadership, you might take the view that it would be better to have a general election. And that would be more in the party's interest and maybe more in the country's interest, although you know, the polls are up and down. But why would it be better to have a people's vote? Or do you think it would be better to have a people's vote?
Oh, I'd be perfectly happy with a general election. Perfectly happy. I mean, I'm a Labour politician. The chance to replace the government, I think, would be a great thing to do. And also, I believe if we did have a general election, I believe one of the key manifesto propositions that Labour would then make in that general election is a people's vote to give the people the opportunity to stop Brexit. So if the government collapses, she loses a motion of confidence in the House of Commons, we'll have a general election. My view is, bring it on. I mean, look what happened last year. I've got no problem with that at all. However, we're not in control of that. The House of Commons will decide that, and I think it's unlikely, I mean, I may be wrong, I hope I am, but I think it's unlikely that enough Conservative MPs would vote for an election to make an election possible. One Conservative MP said to me, and I just report this to you, which is the reason why I don't think there'll be an election next year. He said, I can go to my Conservative association and say, as a matter of conscience, I have to vote against Brexit. I cannot go to my Conservative association and say, as a matter of conscience, I've got to make Jeremy Corbyn Prime Minister. Now, as you know, Jeremy is one of my closest friends, and I'd be delighted at the prospect of him becoming Prime Minister. However, I can't honestly urge that on Conservative MPs. They have to make that decision for themselves. And if they decide that they're not prepared to do that, but that what they are prepared to do is a people's vote, so that the people have a direct say on Brexit, but without having to call an election, then I think that that's the right thing for the country.
Okay, let's bring up the lights if we can and take some questions and thoughts from the audience. And there's so much we could talk about if we could stick to Brexit and the tone of what we just heard. Yes, there's a gentleman down the front here.
I think everything you've said is very interesting, but I can't help looking around this room and looking at the demographic here, and I think we're all of one mind. We want to stop Brexit. But really, we spend a lot of our time talking to ourselves inside the bubble and reinforcing that on social media. When I look outside, and I haven't had your opportunity to travel to other parts of the country where the vote leave was much stronger than it was here, because it was a vote leave here, a lot of people say, oh, I'm bored with this, let's get it over and done. So the question is, how do we manage to speak outside the bubble and make something happen? And I'm not sure I share your confidence in the Labour Party, and I say that as I was once a Labour councillor. I've seen them abstain on issues, and I just despair.
Okay, very, very clear. Andy?
Well, we've got the Labour Party conference coming meeting in Liverpool on Sunday. More than 100 constituency Labour parties, including, I think, Canterbury, have put motions down. Sorry? Housing, right. Well, housing is a big and important issue too, but more than 100 constituency Labour parties have put as what's called a contemporary resolution, which is an urgent resolution they put to the conference, resolutions for people's vote. And there's never been in the history of the Labour Party so many resolutions on one issue. So I would be, how can I put it this way, I'd be astonished if by the end of the conference we, the Labour Party, are not in a position where a people's vote is an option, and that is all we need. That's where we need to be at the moment, because then we'll go into a parliamentary crisis, and the question, as I say, is which options will prove to be the most viable. So I would have confidence that Labour will get to the right place on Brexit. Now, let me choose my words carefully here. I mean, Jeremy and I, actually, we get on extremely well because we're both train spotters. Jeremy's an even more avid train spotter than me. He actually subscribes to Railway Magazine, whereas I only buy to W.H. Smith's when I'm going on long train journeys. But Europe isn't one of Jeremy's natural issues. As somebody put it to me recently, the problem with Europe for Jeremy is it's not a Latin American liberation movement. So it's not necessarily always there. However, what I've noticed, you always look at people's past behaviour as a guide to the future. Since we've been in this Brexit crisis, which has basically been since David Cameron called the referendum, that's when we've been in it. Since then, at every fork in the road, it's important to understand this, because I'm not in the same wing of the party as Jeremy, but it's important you understand why it is that I think we can get through this united as a party. At every fork in the road since then, Jeremy Corbyn has taken the pro-European fork. He came out for remaining in the European Union in the referendum. He made the speech where he said he was in favour, even though he had been against, but he understood that now, in the circumstances we were in now, it wasn't the right course to leave. He voted against the European Union withdrawal bill on the second reading. He voted against it on the third reading. He voted for a customs union. He's been strongly in support of the Northern Ireland backstop. He's had the 6 tests, and the 6 tests say that we must have economic arrangements which are at least as good after we leave as now, and if that test isn't met by the Prime Minister, then we'll vote against her treaty. So though it's been somewhat crab-like, the position he's got to at every stage is one that I believe will lead us to voting against the Prime Minister's deal or no deal and voting for a people's vote. So that's my view, and it's been supported by the actual actions which he's taken so far. On the question of what people think more widely, I think there's been a big change amongst public opinion. It was fairly evenly divided, but as it's become more and more clear that Theresa May is not capable of getting a deal that is going to be at all good, opinions are moving. And the opinion that is moving most dramatically is opinion amongst young people. Now, there aren't, because term hasn't started yet, has it? Or it's
Our freshers have arrived.
Oh, we're just starting, are we? Well, I do lots of meetings up down the country of young people now, and I'll be doing a lot with as term gets going and freshers events and all that. And young people are really animated by this European thing, as I said earlier. And I believe if we have a referendum, the young will vote. By young, I mean under 35s, which is very young for many of us. I mean, youth, by the way, is a very relative concept. I am still exceptionally young for a member of the House of Lords. I am 55. The average age of members of the House of Lords is 72. And apparently somebody did some research on this. Being a member of the House of Lords adds about 20 years to your life expectancy because you have something to do. I mean, you know, you carry on. And so members of the House of Lords go until about 95. So I've got a long, long way to go, even before I reach average age. But I understand that in the country at large, young tends to mean something a bit younger than that. However, among under 35s, I think the turnout will be very high. I think in a referendum on Europe where the vital interests of young people are at stake, I believe the turnout amongst under 35s will be as high in a people's vote over the next year as amongst the over 60s, which has never happened in the modern history of this country. Now, overwhelmingly, young people are against Brexit, overwhelmingly. And the younger you get, the more against Brexit they are. Now, how can I put this delicately? We've got 1.5 million fewer voters than we had 2 years ago. There are 1.5 million new 18 to 19-year-olds. There's almost certainly now a majority in the House of Commons for votes for 16 and 17-year-olds, which I completely agree with if there's a referendum, because their future is going to be more at stake than that of any other part of the community.
And they had it in the Scottish referendum.
And it was there in the Scottish referendum, and Scotland and Wales have already legislated for the vote for all elections for 16 and 17-year-olds. And the turnout, as I say, I think will shoot up amongst under 35. If you just aggregate those figures and do the maths, that is the equivalent of 6 million new Remain votes. And in the last 18 months, more than 1 million EU residents in this country have taken citizenship for existential reasons. Their whole ability to live and work here is at stake. There's some here, I imagine, some here who are EU residents who've taken citizenship. Well, which is great, and you're very welcome. Now, can I make a prediction? I think almost every EU resident who has taken citizenship in the last years, I think I know how they're going to be voting in this referendum. And I think they've got a big interest in voting as well. Now, that's potentially another million. So my own view is that the difficult thing is getting the people's vote, because you've got this parliamentary crisis where, to be blunt, you've got to get 25 or 30 Conservative MPs to vote against what is going to be a three-line where the government might fall. That is a very tough thing. But if we do get it, my own view is it's going to be like 1975. The mature reflection of the British people, seeing this deal, when it comes through their letterbox, they can read it, they see what it means for them. I think we're going to win this referendum easily. And we should have absolute confidence in this. We should not be defeatist. Part of the reason we're in this mess is 30 years of defeatism in terms of our relationship with Europe. Well, I'm not up for that any longer. It's nearly destroyed this country. We're not doing that anymore. We're standing up for what we believe, and we can win.
Some more thoughts. There's a gentleman over there.
I can see that you're very much relying on the strong possibility for people's vote, and certainly I hope this is what we get, and also the possibility of a general election somewhere in the mix if that doesn't happen. But it may be that neither of these things indeed materialise, and so I'd like to ask you, especially as you're a peer, what you see as the role of the House of Lords in averting total disaster, because arguably that's what the upper house is for.
But the position of the Lords is very difficult in this. I mean, in a free vote in the House of Lords, we're something like 4 or 5 to 1 in favour of staying in the EU. But we're not the elected House. And our role is to ask, and we do, ask the House of Commons to think again on issues. We asked them, for example, we sent them back a proposition both for staying in the single market and for staying in the customs union. We also sent them back a proposal that any EU withdrawal agreement must, in law, not just rhetorically by the Prime Minister, must in law be consistent with the Good Friday Agreement. Now, we won on the Good Friday Agreement one because there was going to be a big rebellion on the Conservative side, because there were a lot of Conservative MPs who simply are not prepared to be party to any EU withdrawal that could put peace in Northern Ireland in jeopardy. So we got a majority there, and then the government accepted the amendment because it had to. They just about managed to rally majorities against both the customs union and the single market, including, unfortunately, this terrible incident where Dominic Grieve, do you remember, he voted against his own amendments. This is what the power of the whips can be in the House of Commons. Now, the convention is that once the House of Lords has asked the House of Commons to think again, it does not then insist on its amendments. Now, that is only a convention. In law, we have the power, we can delay any legislation for a year. And in the context of Brexit, if we were to seek to delay the legislation for a year, that would sink it. Because, of course, in a year, that means she'd have no withdrawal agreement, so she would have to change her policy. But my strong sense on this is that the job of the House of Lords continues to be to ask the House of Commons to think again, but not to seek to overrule it. Because you've got to understand the situation we're in at the moment. We just had a discussion just a few moments ago about democracy. Now, much as I like the House of Lords, nobody can claim that it's a democratic body. You know, I am there because of the vote of one person, Tony Blair. He put me in there. Now, we have some hereditary peers who are indeed elected. They're elected by the other hereditary peers. So the last member of the House of Lords, who's a hereditary peer, was elected with an electorate of 11. And there were 4 candidates. This is not democracy in action in the House of Lords. My own view is that we should have an elected second chamber. It should be situated in the north of England, so we have one chamber in the south, one. And I've got quite radical ideas on this. And that's not going to happen, of course, all before the end of next March. So I think our role, I'm ambitious for what we can do. I think we can do a people's vote. I don't think I'm going to get. There's also this slight problem of Turkish voting for Christmas. It isn't a wildly popular proposition in the House of Lords that we should be elected. I have to tell you, there aren't many of us who are in favour of that. So I think we're going to be operating within the current constitution arrangements until next March, and that means we may have a role in asking the House of Commons to think again. I do not think we can try and veto, and I think if we were to try and veto, this would then become a fundamental issue about the nature of our democracy, whereas keeping the argument firmly on the people's votes is about more democracy, not about less democracy.
Thank you. There was somebody at the back, and then there was a gentleman at the front in the check shirt.
Hi, I'm a writer for Enquire, and I was just wondering, the Bank of England has said that house prices could fall by 1/3 in the event of a no deal. Should young people want a no deal so we can actually have a chance of getting on the housing market?
I were young people, I wouldn't go down that road because they'll have no jobs in order to be able to buy the houses even a third less. And we don't want crisis. I mean, because very unpredictable things happen in crises. Now, my own view is that we do have a housing crisis, let's be clear. And the answer to that, by the way, is to build more houses. The reason why we've got house prices that are going through the roof is that for the last 30 years, we've been building about half the number of homes that we need. In particular, we almost entirely stopped building new social housing. Social housing which is at more affordable levels of rent and to buy. Now, the Prime Minister 2 days ago told us that we were now going to start building some social housing, except it's not going to start until 2021. Apparently it takes us 3 years to start building a house, but we're able to leave the European Union in 6 months. Well, you know, I'd rather start building the houses in 6 months and not think about leaving the European Union for 3 years. I think we need to get our priorities right as a country. One of the things we need to do is a massive home building programme, particularly social homes, and that is what will start to tackle this problem of unaffordable housing. The idea that we should destroy our economy and our place in the world as a way of dealing with house prices is a slight lack of proportion, isn't it?
Gentleman there.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for all your optimism and all the energy you're bringing to this meeting, which I think is wonderful, and I wish you all success. I just wish to shift the perspective a little bit, maybe looking at the broader picture and also the long-term picture. The European project really resulted from the ashes of the Second World War, and it was not only an economic project, obviously very important, and a political project, but it was also a peace project, and I think it's been very successful in that. Yeah. Maybe not in advertising it here on this island, but certainly most people in Europe understand the importance of that after 2 Second World Wars, and I'm traveling through Eastern Europe at the moment, and when you talk to people, I think the sense about what that actually meant in those regions is significantly different than here. I think in the 1990s, and by that time, Europe really had already made major success of this project. I and my family began to settle here as a very welcoming, very open place. And what I would like to do is really shift the perspective onto the European people who have been held hostage for the last 2 years. And which I think, at least from when I came to Britain, was not conducive to the values and ideas of this country, which I find very, very, very troubling. And my question is this. We Europeans have been hurled abuse, and my 5-year-old son has heard language which I can't repeat in this room. We have been, Nazi salute being shown at us. This is a family we have 2 passports, most of us, but one has not. We are worried that some of us may have to leave now. I think these kind of personal issues are easily forgotten in some of these very practical, very political debates. And my question is this to you. I think we may get through this, and I very much hope you succeed. But my sense is that a lot of trust has been lost or squandered with, and I think this trust will take a long time to rebuild after this period, possibly as much as a generation as it has done for Germans, for whom it took a very long time after the Second World War to re-establish their place in the world and show that they can do better than they've done in the first half of the century. So I would like to have your views. How do you see the long-term perspective for the British people? I think the British people have to realize that they have done a lot of damage to the trust for many people in this country and elsewhere.
Andrew, and could I just add to that? You know, we have a lot of staff here, a lot of students from the European Union who are most welcome to be here. We want to continue to attract people, both some of the best brains in Western Europe, and it is undoubtedly a worry. You've touched a real nerve there, sir.
Well, I completely understand that. Can I just say, first of all, on behalf of all those of us who haven't come to settle here but started off living here in the first place, we regard our fellow Europeans who have come to settle here, we regard them as every bit as equal citizens as those of us who live here to start with. And I, speaking as a all I can say is I think it's outrageous that there should be any question mark over, that there should be any issue whatever about about our fellow Europeans not being able to stay, just as we expect that British citizens, the million of them who live on the continent, will be treated as equal citizens in their country. That is a very big part of what Europe is about. That is one of the reasons why we have peace, stability, and it's been such a success. We shouldn't be putting that in question, and I'm just, all I can say is I think it's just a disgrace what's happened on that score. There is, as you say, a stain on our reputation as a country in the way this has been handled in the last 2 years, and I think the sooner we get over it, the better, is the only thing I can say about that. On the peace project, there's this excellent book which I do recommend that you buy, Saving Britain by Will Hutton and myself. I bought a whole load of copies to sell over the dinner afterwards. And I do this completely unashamedly because all the profits are going to the European movement. We've had too little of the European movement recently. We need much stronger pro-European voice. And it's a kind of manifesto for staying in. But one of the things there's a chapter on the whole of the international situation in which I quote in it the Treaty of Paris, which is the treaty that set up the European Coal and Steel Community and is in many ways the Magna Carta of Europe. It's the treaty that started the whole European process, which begins with the words. It doesn't talk about coal and steel at the beginning at all. It begins with the words, considering that world peace can be safeguarded only by creative efforts commensurate with the dangers that threaten it, convinced that the contribution which an organised and vital Europe can make to civilization is indispensable to the maintenance of peaceful relations, resolved to substitute for age-old rivalries the merging of their essential interests to create, by establishing an economic community, the basis for a broader and deeper community among peoples long divided by bloody conflicts, have decided to create a European coal and steel community. That is the reason why the European Union was founded. That was why it has been the harbinger of peace and stability across Europe for 70 years, and that is why it's every bit as relevant in 2018 as it was in 1946, when Winston Churchill essentially laid out the blueprint in his Zurich speech, which called for a kind of United States of Europe. And that's why I am proud, 100% proud, without any reservation whatsoever, to call myself a European as well as a Brit, and it's why we should fight till the last possible moment to keep ourselves in the European Union and not to put in question not just our economy, but our peace and stability and the whole basis on which we live together as fellow Europeans in this continent of ours.
Thank you. There's a lady there in the white shirt.
Yes, a lady for a change. It's all been men. It's interesting.
It has, yes.
Firstly, to that gentleman, I have applied for my German citizenship because my father lost his citizenship because he was a Jew and the Nazis took it away. I have now applied for mine as a right because personally I do not want to leave Europe. So that's my stand on it. So I want to remain. Now, I have two things to ask. Firstly, I'm a Labour voter. I have been a Labour voter all my life. I would like Mr. Corbyn. I think his moral stand on many things is terrific. I think he's been mute on Brexit, and it's very worrying. I would like it more verbal, stronger, and clearer what his stand is. Now, there are a lot of disagreements in the Labour Party, the different groups, as to their views. But what you're looking for is a leader who leads and has a clear view. That's what I'd like. Verbal, more verbal, clearer, stronger. That's what I'd like. The second thing is, my gut feeling is that Theresa May is, excuse the language, up because she doesn't want it to happen. That is my gut reaction, that she doesn't actually want it to happen. And this is the result of it.
Well, I'm not sure that she doesn't want it to happen. I think her view is that she has got to get over the line next March to be able to survive politically. So I'm not sure she doesn't want it to happen. Where you're absolutely right, though, is that she does realise it is the least worst option that she's seeking, not the best option. She knows that the best option is to stay in the European Union. I'm very struck because, of course, I see her from time to time. And when I saw her a few months ago at a meeting with business leaders, And the first question inevitably was, Prime Minister, do you think that this is the best, because she set out what she hoped that she could negotiate. Do you think that this is going to be better than we've got at the moment as a country? And there was a brief silence, because she's not very good at lying, so she couldn't bring herself to say yes. What she said was, well, I have this instruction from the British people. It's a formulation she uses all the time. Well, all I can say is, if that is the reason why she's doing the wrong thing, then she's supposed to be Prime Minister, and the job of Prime Minister is to lead. What you do is you ask the British people if they might just, if I set out all the facts before you, give you a new instruction. I think the British people are waiting to give her new instructions, but they've got to be asked to do so, and that is the way that we deal with this. Yeah.
And
Now,
what about Jeremy Corbyn?
Jeremy, I've been quite open about Jeremy. I don't think that he's led as strongly as I would like. He hasn't yet done anything that cuts against us taking a line that will lead to defeating the Prime Minister's treaty because it's a bad thing for the country, and then having a people's vote. I would like him to declare as soon as possible that we do actually intend to do that. And all of my work inside the Labour Party and in the media and in the House of Lords has been to that end. I am confident that we can get there, and that is what we should be seeking to achieve over the next 3 months. Yeah, but it's a collective endeavour, and there is this thing called the shadow cabinet. He's got colleagues around him, and this whole thing needs to move. I am confident we can get there. You do need to understand the background with Jeremy. Until 5 years ago, he was an out-and-out anti-European. I mean, he voted against all the treaties. It's not, if I can just explain him to you, what you see is what you get. I mean, there's no dissembling. Jeremy was. He was part of that view, which was a view held by many on the left wing of my party in the 1960s, 70s and 80s, that the European Union was a capitalist conspiracy, that it was conspiring against the workers and all that. Now, actually, I think that was wrong then. I think it became particularly wrong after Jacques Delors became president of the European Commission and developed the social Europe, you know, the Working Time Directive and all of the social and the environmental regulation. And it's because of that Jeremy has moved. He hasn't moved as far and as fast as I would have liked, but he has moved. He has, at every fork in the road, as I say, taken the anti-Brexit position, and I'm confident that that's where we will get to. Don't worry, don't worry. I've been engaged in those conversations.
I'm shocked to hear that. We've only got a couple of minutes left. So I just want to return to something you mentioned earlier, which is, do facts actually matter if for some people Brexit is a religion? I mean, that's basically what you've said. And you have been arguing facts. You just said the facts are these, the facts are this, and so on. Does that actually matter? Because some people feel in their gut that leaving is absolutely right, and they're entitled to do that. So the facts didn't cut through before, and some of those completely false facts, the £350 million, all the millions of Turkish people who are going to come and live next door to you, and so on, were just wrong, and people knew that. They're not stupid.
Well, the facts don't matter to everyone. Let's be clear. There are some people who do vote on gut instinct or emotion. And this idea of sovereignty and taking back control is quite a powerful emotion, and I do completely understand it, particularly after 30 years of the Daily Mail and the Sun and all of that, creating this view of Europe being a bureaucratic, undemocratic organisation which is doing things to us, as opposed to the truth, which is it's the means by which we exercise our sovereignty to control the environment around us to our mutual advantage. So that clearly is a part of the election that's going to be true next time as it was last time, for whom this is an emotional issue. It's not an issue based on straightforward, simple facts. But I do not believe that's the centre ground of the voters. It never has been in this country. The centre ground, in all my experience of politics going back over 30 years, the centre ground, by and large, goes with the best arguments. That's what by and large happens. And even 2 years ago, part of the problem 2 years ago is that because of the nature of the referendum campaign, the best arguments didn't properly out, partly because a whole lot of lies which purported to be arguments were made on the Leave side, which came to be believed, which I think, to be frank, is partly a criticism of the Remain side, that they didn't counter them. But there was another reason why too, which is that the campaign to Remain last time was led by David Cameron. Now, David Cameron, with the best will in the world, was about 2/3 to being a Leaver himself. He was about as close as it was possible to be to being a leaver without actually in favour of leaving. The arguments that we heard earlier, the points which are hugely important about the whole peace of Europe, the fact that our whole future and security depend on it, he didn't make any of those arguments because they would have been too emotive inside the Conservative Party, and he didn't want a big argument inside the Conservative Party. He wanted a very narrow argument about trade treaties, rules of the single market and all that, and he kept referring to Europe, which is, let's be clear, it's a whole union, it's a union of peoples. He kept referring it to this organisation as if it was a kind of golf club, which you could be a member of 1 year, and then if it's too expensive, you don't join it the next year with the view that you might join it again 2 years later. So my own view is what actually happened in the referendum campaign 2 years ago, I can understand the result. Next time, it needs to be different. We need the facts out. We need people leading the Remain campaign who actually believe in remaining, who are prepared to make the big emotional arguments, but also the factual arguments, and put all of the arguments on the table, including peace and prosperity, and not just narrow arguments to do with trade, and I'm absolutely confident if we do that, we can win.
And just a final thought, we have a minute left. A lot of people in this room who contacted me, people by email and so on, have asked, what can they do?
Two things. Firstly, 20th of October, we need 1 million people on the streets of London. So are you all going to be there on the 20th of October? If we can get a huge demonstration on the streets of London, then that is just before the meeting of the European Council on the 27th of October. It'll play a big part in making members of Parliament aware of the fact that there is really deep feeling amongst their voters. And that this isn't just, the usual suspects, as we were saying earlier, and a small group. This is a massive, organised move amongst the British people. That's the first thing. The second thing you can do is to engage intensively with your Member of Parliament. Now, if you're lucky enough to have a Member of Parliament in the right places, you are here in Canterbury, that's fine. Many of you will come from constituencies outside where you've got a potential Leave Member of Parliament, and you should really engage with them, because they've got to understand that this is not just a run-of-the-mill decision that they're going to take when they cast their vote. This is one of those life-changing and nation-changing decisions, and people will be watching, and history will be watching as well. And to say that they're doing what they're doing and keeping their head down and keeping their mouth shut because of party whips at the behest of a Prime Minister is probably going to be gone in 2 or 3 months' time. That is well below the level of events. They should, we're the country of Churchill, Lloyd George, a country which, make the defence of us, things haven't gone great in the last 2 years, but we have been a constant, consistent, proud champion of peace, stability and liberal values across Europe, and we have not stopped being so because of this Brexit business. We have a huge international reputation, international responsibilities and duties to our own people, and we need our Members of Parliament to realise that that is the level of events that they need to operate at, and not the level of events of the government chief whip and people trying to dragoon them with more petty considerations. Now, that's what you feel. That's the reason why you're all here this evening. There are hundreds of thousands who are coming to meetings like this now every week. The European movement's got going in a massive way. Students are getting organised in a really serious way. As I say, if we can get 1 million people on the streets of London on the 20th of October, the only thing I think that can stop us now is a lack of confidence on our own part that we can win. If you believe we can win, I believe we can win, you believe we can win this. We shouldn't have any hesitation in making the arguments, in mobilising our friends, our relations, our communities. That's how democracies work. We can win this. And we should not stint in the next 6 months because the whole future of the country is at stake.
Andrew Adonis, thank you very much. Well done. Thank you all for coming, and we'll invite Andrew back when the people's vote leads to the referendum. Thank you.
Thank you.